The morning sun rose over the small town, spilling its warm light on the quiet streets. Birds chirped softly, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery on the corner. In one of the modest houses lining the street lived Alex, a young man in his late 20s who had always struggled to make ends meet. His apartment was small, with peeling paint on the walls and a kitchen that had seen better days. It wasn't a place people would dream of living in, but to Alex, it was home. He had learned to make do with what he had. Even if it meant sacrificing little comforts that others took for granted, Alex worked at a small grocery store in town. It wasn't a glamorous job, and the pay was modest, but it helped him cover rent, food, and the occasional small treat. Every day, he stocked shelves, helped customers find what they needed, and sometimes cleaned up the messes left behind by careless shoppers. His coworkers often joked about him. They called him clumsy, slow, and overly serious about things that didn't matter. They laughed when he meticulously organized the shelves or checked and rechecked the receipts at the end of the day. They didn't realize that Alex had a method to everything he did. He wasn't just careful. He was patient, thoughtful, and quietly dreaming of something bigger. Despite the teasing, Alex had a good heart. He would help anyone who asked and never refused a hand to those in need. He had a few close friends, but even they often laughed at his ideas. One day, he had mentioned wanting to start a small business selling handmade crafts online. Everyone had burst out laughing, not because they didn't think he could do it, but because they didn't believe it was realistic. "Alex, you can barely keep up with your bills, and now you want to sell things online." "That's cute," one of his friends had said, patting him on the back with a smirk. Alex had smiled politely, not arguing, because he knew that deep down, his friends didn't understand his vision yet. The laughter didn't bother him. He had learned to live with it. It wasn't easy being the one everyone joked about, but he had built a quiet resilience over the years. He had grown up in a family that struggled financially. His parents had always done their best, but money had never come easily. Alex had seen his father work long hours at a factory, coming home tired and worn out, only to face bills he couldn't fully cover. His mother had taken on odd jobs, cleaning houses and babysitting children, just to make sure there was food on the table. From a young age, Alex understood the value of hard work, patience, and careful planning. He didn't want to follow the path of endless struggle that he had seen his parents walk at the store. Alex's days followed a simple rhythm. He would arrive early, before the first customers walked in, to make sure the shelves were neat and organized. He liked things orderly. It made the chaos of life feel a little more manageable. When customers came in, he greeted them warmly, even if they were in a hurry or in a bad mood. He learned to read people quickly who needed a smile, who needed guidance, and who just wanted to get in and out. Some customers, especially the regulars, appreciated his kindness and attentiveness. They would often stop by just to chat with him, asking about his day or sharing small stories from their lives. But not everyone was kind. Some coworkers would whisper behind his back, making jokes about his slow pace or the way he always double-checked everything. Alex had grown used to it. He had learned to smile, nod, and focus on his work instead of letting their words get under his skin. He had a quiet confidence in himself that no amount of teasing could shake. He believed that one day, people would see that he was capable of more than they imagined. On one particularly slow afternoon, as Alex was arranging cans of soup on the top shelf, he overheard a couple of coworkers laughing near the checkout counter. "Look at him, counting cans like it's some kind of treasure hunt," one of them said, snickering. Alex didn't respond. He simply continued his work, making sure every can was perfectly aligned. To an outsider, it might have seemed obsessive, but to Alex, it was practice in patience and attention to detail qualities he knew would serve him well in the future. That evening, after his shift ended, Alex walked home slowly. The streets were quiet, with only the occasional car passing by. He carried a small bag of groceries he had bought for the week. His apartment was modest, but he liked it that way. It reminded him of the life he wanted to build, not one filled with unnecessary luxuries, but one where he could feel secure and proud of his own efforts. He unpacked the groceries, making sure everything was put away neatly. Even in the small details of life, Alex found comfort in order after dinner. He sat at his small wooden table and opened a notebook he kept hidden in a drawer. It was old, with frayed edges, but it was filled with his ideas, plans, and calculations. Some pages had sketches of small business ideas, others had lists of goals he wanted to achieve over the next few years. He reviewed them carefully, adding notes and making adjustments. This was his secret world, the place where he dreamed without judgment or ridicule. He knew that these plans were more than just scribbles on paper, they were the foundation for a future. He was determined to create. Alex had a particular plan he was excited about. It was small at first, a simple way to earn extra money on the side, but he saw potential for growth. He had researched it thoroughly, learning everything he could from online courses, videos, and forums. He was cautious, knowing that financial mistakes could be costly, but he was willing to take calculated risks. While others laughed at his enthusiasm, he silently worked, saving a small amount from each paycheck, cutting unnecessary expenses, and preparing to launch his idea when the time was right. Evenings were his favorite time. The world was quieter, and he could think clearly without interruptions. He would sit at his table, sometimes sipping tea, sometimes just staring out the window, imagining what life could be like if he succeeded. He pictured himself being able to help his family, having enough money to live comfortably, and maybe even giving back to his community. These thoughts filled him with quiet determination. He didn't need anyone else to believe in him. He believed in himself. Sometimes, his friends would call in the evenings, checking in and chatting about their own lives. They would tease him gently, asking if he had any new get-rich-quick schemes or joking
about how he would probably still be at the grocery store in 10 years.
Alex would laugh along, careful not to reveal too much about his plans. He had learned that patience was key. If he revealed too much too soon, people might laugh, or worse, discourage him. He knew the real work was done in silence, away from the eyes of those who didn't understand. There were moments, though, when doubt crept in. Sometimes after a long day at the store or a particularly exhausting week, Alex would wonder if his efforts would ever pay off. Would people ever take him seriously? Would he ever escape the cycle of small paychecks and constant teasing? But in those moments, he reminded himself of his own resilience. He thought about the sacrifices his parents had made, the lessons he had learned, and the small victories he had already achieved by being disciplined and focused. He refused to let temporary doubts overshadow the bigger picture. One weekend, Alex decided to take a small step toward his dream. He spent the entire Saturday researching suppliers, comparing prices, and making a plan for how he could start his side project. He took careful notes, calculated potential profits, and considered every possible risk. It was exhausting work, but it felt meaningful. For the first time, he could see a path forward. Even if it was small and uncertain, his coworkers continued to laugh at him, of course. They didn't know that while they spent their weekends partying or relaxing, Alex was quietly laying the groundwork for a better future. Sometimes he would hear them joke about him behind his back, saying he was wasting his time or being too careful. He let the words roll off his back. He knew that the laughter of today might turn into the surprise and respect of tomorrow by the time the week ended. Alex felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had followed his routines, worked hard at the store, saved money, and made progress on his personal project. No one outside of him knew the work he had done, and that was fine. He didn't need applause or validation. What mattered was that he was moving forward, step by step, building something that no one could take away from him. As he lay in bed that night, Alex reflected on the week. He thought about the people who laughed at him, the challenges he faced, and the small victories he had achieved. He realized that life was a series of moments, some frustrating, some joyful, some filled with doubt. But he also knew that perseverance, patience, and quiet effort could turn those moments into something extraordinary. He closed his notebook, turned off the lamp, and drifted into sleep with a sense of calm determination. Tomorrow would bring another day, another chance to move closer to his dreams, and he was ready for it. Life for Alex was not glamorous or easy. He had no fancy car, no luxurious apartment, and no wide circle of influential friends. But he had something more important: a plan, discipline, and a heart that refused to give up. While the world laughed at him, he continued to work quietly, knowing that one day the results of his effort would speak louder than any words. And so, as the town slept, Alex's story quietly began to unfold, a story of patience, determination, and the small, unseen steps that can lead to extraordinary outcomes. After the quiet determination of the past months, Alex felt ready to take the next step in his journey. He had spent so long working at the store, saving every possible penny, and quietly planning his future, that he now had a sense of control he had never felt before. The savings in his account were small but steady, growing slowly as he resisted the temptation to spend on things he didn't truly need. Every dollar he tucked away felt like a seed, a small promise that, if nurtured, could grow into something meaningful. Alex had realized early on that his approach needed to be patient. He had seen people around him make quick decisions about money rushing into investments, buying things they didn't need, or borrowing recklessly, and most of the time, those choices ended in disappointment. He had no desire to repeat those mistakes. Instead, he wanted to move quietly, carefully, so that when the results finally came, they would be solid and undeniable. One evening, after another long day at the store, Alex settled into his small kitchen with a notebook and his laptop. He had discovered an opportunity online, a small, low-risk investment that promised steady growth over time. It wasn't flashy, and it certainly wouldn't make anyone rich overnight. But it aligned perfectly with his goal: stability and gradual improvement. He spent hours reading forums, analyzing trends, and learning from people who had already succeeded in similar ventures. He made notes, cross-checked numbers, and calculated potential risks. It was meticulous work, but Alex enjoyed it. This was the part of life where his mind could focus entirely, without interruptions or ridicule. His friends, meanwhile, had no idea what he was doing. They continued to tease him about his frugal habits and his cautious approach to life. "Why are you still saving? Why not spend a little? Have fun?" one friend asked, laughing. Alex smiled politely, knowing that any explanation would likely be met with more laughter or disbelief. He had learned not to argue. Some things were better kept private. His work, his dreams, and his small victories belonged to him, not to anyone else's amusement. Alex also started exploring ways to earn extra money outside of his day job. He experimented with small side projects, crafting simple handmade items, offering tutoring in his spare time, and even testing small online sales. At first, these efforts didn't bring much profit, but he treated them as practice, learning the basics of business, customer service, and self-discipline. Each small success, no matter how minor, gave him confidence. Each failure taught him lessons he would carry forward in the evenings. When most people were relaxing, Alex would dive deep into research. He discovered new tools and methods for managing finances and small businesses. He read about how successful people planned their expenses, tracked their growth, and minimized risks. He learned about the importance of patience, about waiting for the right opportunities rather than chasing every trend. The more he learned, the more he realized that the laughter and doubts of others didn't matter. What mattered was consistent effort, clear thinking, and quiet determination. At work, life continued as usual. His coworkers joked about him, laughed at his careful habits, sometimes even mocked his occasional enthusiasm for new ideas. One day, a colleague saw him carefully organizing a shipment of fresh produce and commented, "Do you really think anyone cares if the tomatoes are perfectly lined up?" Alex smiled, saying nothing, because he knew that small acts of discipline were building his character, even if others didn't notice. He understood that consistency mattered more than applause, and in time would pay off in ways people couldn't predict. Alex's parents, while proud of his hard work, often worried about him. They remembered the struggles of their own youth and feared he might be too cautious, missing opportunities because he hesitated. "You're always so careful," his mother said one evening. "Sometimes you have to take a risk to move forward." Alex nodded, understanding her concern. He didn't intend to avoid risks forever. He simply wanted to choose the right ones, those that would bring real results without unnecessary losses. With every passing month, savings grew and his plans became more concrete. He started creating a timeline for his goals, breaking them into achievable steps. He listed what he wanted to accomplish in the next 6 months, the next year, and even the next 5 years. He reviewed his expenses carefully, ensuring that every dollar was accounted for and used wisely. Some people might have found this obsessive, but for Alex it was empowering. It gave him a sense of control over a life that had often felt uncertain and unstable. One day, Alex came across an opportunity that seemed perfect. A small local business was looking for a partner to help expand their reach online. It wasn't a huge venture, but it had potential. He carefully calculated how much he could invest, what kind of profit he could expect, and what risks were involved. He spent days analyzing the details, writing down scenarios, and preparing a plan. When he finally felt ready, he reached out to the owner with a proposal. It was polite, professional, and thorough, everything he had learned through months of research and preparation. His friends were, as usual, skeptical. "Are you serious? You really think they'll go for it?" one asked, laughing. Alex smiled, saying nothing. He had learned that it wasn't their belief that mattered. What mattered was his own confidence in the plan, his willingness to put in the effort, and his careful preparation. He knew that people often laughed at those who dared to dream quietly, but he also knew that laughter could quickly turn into surprise when results appeared as the weeks passed. Alex balanced his day job with his new venture. He worked long hours, often staying up late into the night to manage details, answer emails, and track progress. It was exhausting, but he felt alive in a way he hadn't before. Every small win, every positive response from clients, and every step forward reinforced his belief that he was on the right path. The laughter of others seemed to fade into the background, placed by the quiet satisfaction of meaningful work. There were moments of doubt, of course. Sometimes an email went unanswered, or a shipment arrived late, or a calculation didn't turn out as expected. In those moments, Alex felt frustration and worry, but he didn't give up. He reminded himself that setbacks were part of the journey. He carefully analyzed mistakes, learned from them, and adjusted his plan. Each challenge became a lesson, each delay a chance to improve. The more he practiced this, the more resilient he became. At home, Alex's small apartment became a hub of activity. His desk was covered with notes, receipts, and plans. He had a small whiteboard on the wall where he tracked goals and deadlines. It might have looked chaotic to an outsider, but to Alex, it was a map of progress, a visual representation of the journey he was undertaking. Every item had a purpose, every note a reminder of the work ahead. His parents noticed the change in him. He seemed more confident, more focused, and strangely calm, despite the extra work. "You're different," his father said one evening. "You seem happier." Alex smiled. He didn't need to explain everything. He knew that true change wasn't always visible to others, but it was powerful nonetheless. He was building something for himself, something that no one could take away. Evenings were his favorite part of the day. After a long day of work, he would sit quietly with a cup of tea, reviewing the progress he had made. He would check his notes, update his plans, and reflect on what had worked and what needed improvement. Sometimes he would imagine the future, picturing what life could be like if he succeeded. He didn't dwell on fantasies or wishful thinking. Instead, he visualized concrete steps and achievable goals. It gave him motivation and clarity. Over time, the quiet work began to pay off. Small returns started appearing from his initial investments. Orders for his online side project began trickling in. The numbers were modest, but they were real. Tangible proof that his efforts were working. He felt a quiet thrill every time he checked his accounts and saw progress. It was proof that patience, discipline, careful planning were beginning to yield results. His friends still joked, of course. They still laughed at his careful habits, his long hours, and his quiet dedication. But now, there was a hint of curiosity in their laughter. They noticed that Alex seemed different. He was more confident, more focused, and somehow more capable. Some of them began asking questions, though cautiously, about what he was doing. Alex would answer lightly, careful not to reveal too much, knowing that results would speak louder than words. Through it all, Alex remained humble. He knew that the journey was just beginning. Small successes were encouraging, but they were only stepping stones. He continued to save, invest, and plan. He continued to learn, to adapt, and to improve. Every day brought new challenges, but he faced them with quiet determination. He had learned that true progress was built on consistency, patience, and effort, qualities that could withstand doubt, ridicule, and even failure. By the end of part 2, Alex had created a foundation. It wasn't visible to everyone, but it was strong. His savings were growing steadily, his side projects were gaining traction, and his confidence was blossoming. The laughter of friends and coworkers still echoed in the background, but it no longer had power over him. He had discovered a deeper truth, that quiet effort, careful planning, an unwavering focus could build a life far beyond what anyone could imagine. And so, Alex moved forward, step by step, hour by hour, quietly shaping a future that was entirely his own. The world might not have seen it yet, but the work he was doing would soon reveal itself in ways that no one could ignore. He had learned the power of patience, the importance of preparation, and the strength that comes from believing in oneself. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Alex could see the path clearly, and he was ready to walk it. Months passed. Alex's quiet efforts were beginning to show real progress. The small side project he had started was gaining traction, slowly but steadily. Orders were coming in more regularly now, and people were beginning to appreciate the quality and care he put into his work. It was a thrill unlike anything he had experienced before. For the first time, he felt that the long hours, the careful planning, and the quiet discipline were paying off in tangible ways. Even so, life at the grocery store continued as usual. His coworkers still teased him, some of them in good humor, and some with a sharper edge. They didn't know about the small wins he was achieving outside of work, and most of them assumed he was still struggling like before. "Still counting cans, I see?" One coworker joked one afternoon, laughing at the meticulous way Alex had organized the shelves. Alex smiled politely, saying nothing. He had learned long ago that arguments were pointless. Results would speak for themselves eventually. Alex's friends were a little more curious now. They had begun to notice subtle changes in his behavior. He was calmer, more confident, and seemed to carry a sense of purpose that had been absent before. A few of them asked questions, though cautiously, about what he had been working on. Alex answered lightly, careful not to reveal too much. He knew that the best way to handle curiosity was with small hints, never full disclosure. The journey was his. He wanted to make sure the results were undeniable before sharing them fully at home. Alex's routine had become more disciplined. Each evening, after completing his day job and attending to his side projects, he would review his progress. He updated his notebook with every order, every investment return, and every step forward. Sometimes he would feel exhausted, his body aching from long days and late nights, but the sense of progress kept him going. Each small win felt like proof that he was on the right path. The turning point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Alex received an email from a small business owner he had contacted months ago. At first, he almost didn't recognize the name because so much time had passed. The email was polite and professional, expressing interest in a potential partnership. They wanted to meet with him in person to discuss how he could contribute to their business and help expand their online reach. Alex felt a rush of excitement and nervousness all at once. This was the opportunity he had been preparing for, and it could make a significant difference if handled well. He spent the next few days preparing meticulously. He reviewed all his plans, rehearsed how he would present his ideas, and organized his financial documents. For weeks, he had quietly worked toward a goal like this, and now the moment had arrived. The thought of meeting someone who could potentially help him grow his venture made his heart race. But he reminded himself to stay calm and confident. Preparation was key, and he had done his homework thoroughly. The day of the meeting arrived. Alex dressed neatly, wearing clothes that were simple but professional. He carried a small portfolio with his notes, calculations, and projections. As he walked into the office of the small business, he could feel a mix of anticipation and nerves. The owner greeted him warmly, and they exchanged polite small talk before getting down to the discussion. Alex explained his plans clearly and concisely, showing the research he had done, the small steps he had already taken, and the potential growth he envisioned. The owner listened intently, asking questions along the way. Alex answered carefully, making sure to be honest about risks while highlighting the careful planning he had done to minimize them. He could see a spark of interest in the owner's eyes, a recognition that Alex was serious, capable, and prepared. By the end of the meeting, the owner nodded, expressing confidence in Alex's abilities and willingness to move forward with the partnership. Alex left the office with a sense of accomplishment that was hard to describe. Months of quiet effort were finally paying off. When he returned home, Alex felt a mix of relief and excitement. He knew the work was far from over, but this was a milestone. He had taken the first big step toward turning his vision into reality. That evening, he shared a small celebration with his parents, explaining that something significant had happened without revealing every detail. His parents were proud, their faces lighting up with smiles. Though they could sense the careful planning and effort that had gone into this success, at work the next day, life continued as usual, but Alex's perspective had shifted. The teasing of coworkers no longer bothered him. He could hear the laughter, the jokes, and the playful remarks, and it barely registered. He was focused on his own progress, on the growing momentum of his venture, and on the steps he needed to take next. For the first time, he felt truly in control of his path, and that sense of empowerment was deeply motivating. Over the following weeks, Alex worked tirelessly to meet the expectations of his new partnership. He coordinated with the business owner, handled orders, managed logistics, and ensured that every detail was executed flawlessly. The work was demanding, but he thrived under the challenge. Each completed task, each satisfied customer, and each small success reinforced his confidence and motivation. Slowly, the results of his efforts began to accumulate, providing tangible proof that his careful planning and dedication were effective. Despite his growing success, Alex remained humble and focused. He didn't let pride or ego interfere with his work. He continued to save money carefully, reinvesting it where necessary and avoiding unnecessary expenditures. He continued to learn, researching new strategies and seeking ways to improve. He knew that the journey was far from over and that each step forward required continued effort and attention. His friends continued to watch him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Some of them began to notice the changes in his life, the way he seemed more confident, more organized, and more purposeful. A few of them tentatively asked questions about what he had been working on, and Alex would smile, giving small hints but keeping the details to himself. He had learned that results, not words, were the most powerful way to demonstrate success. One evening, Alex sat at his kitchen table, reviewing the financial progress of his venture. He compared the projections he had made months ago with the actual numbers and felt a surge of satisfaction. The careful planning, the late nights, and the disciplined approach were finally producing results. He realized that while the laughter and skepticism of others had once been a source of doubt, they had also strengthened his resolve. Each laugh had motivated him to work harder, to prove not to them, but to himself, that he could succeed. Alex also took time to reflect on the lessons he had learned during this journey. Patience had been key. He had resisted the urge to rush into decisions or chase quick wins. Discipline had been essential. He had maintained careful control over his finances and invested in ways that aligned with his long-term goals. And perseverance had been critical. He had continued to move forward even when progress seemed slow or uncertain. These lessons were more valuable than any single success because they would guide him in the future, no matter what challenges arose. At the store, coworkers began to notice subtle differences in Alex. He was more composed, more confident, and somehow more capable. While some continued to tease him, others began to show quiet respect. Recognizing that there was more to Alex than they had assumed, it was a slow shift, almost imperceptible at first, but the change was real. People were starting to see that the quiet, meticulous, and patient young man they had laughed at was capable of achieving something meaningful in his personal life. Alex remained grounded. He continued to live modestly, appreciating the small comforts of home and family. He didn't flaunt his growing success or seek attention. Instead, he focused on building a solid foundation, ensuring that his achievements were sustainable and meaningful. He spent evenings planning, organizing, and reflecting, always looking for ways to improve and grow. Each step was deliberate, each action purposeful, and each success, no matter how small, was celebrated quietly. The turning point had not been dramatic. There had been no sudden windfall or instant recognition. Instead, it had been the result of months of quiet effort, careful planning, and patient persistence. Alex had learned that success was rarely immediate, that it often required sustained effort over time, and that the laughter of others could not define one's worth or potential. One Saturday, after completing a series of important tasks for his venture, Alex took a moment to sit back and reflect. He thought about the long days, the challenges, the doubts, and the small victories. He realized that he had changed not just in his circumstances, but in his character. He was more confident, more disciplined, and more resilient. He had learned to trust himself, to rely on his judgment, and to focus on what truly mattered. As the sun set over the town, Alex felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. He knew the journey was far from over, but he also knew that he had crossed a significant threshold. He had moved from planning and preparation into action and results. The laughter of friends and co-workers, once a source of discomfort, now felt almost irrelevant. What mattered was the progress he had made, the growth he had achieved, and the foundation he had built for the future. And so, Alex continued forward, step by step, day by day, quietly shaping a life that reflected his dedication, patience, and vision. The turning point had arrived not as a dramatic event, but as the moment when months of unseen effort began to yield real, measurable results. He had learned the power of preparation, the importance of patience, and the strength that comes from trusting oneself. The world might not have seen it yet, but Alex knew that the work he had done in silence was about to speak louder than any words ever could. Months of quiet work, careful planning, and persistent effort had brought Alex to a point he had long dreamed about. His small side project had grown steadily. His investments were starting to yield noticeable returns, and he felt more confident than ever in his abilities. The sense of anticipation was building. He knew that the results of all his efforts would soon become visible, not just to himself, but to those around him who had once laughed and doubted him. Alex had always been careful not to flaunt his progress. He didn't want attention or praise before he was ready. He believed that results spoke louder than words, and that the time would come when everyone would see the truth. In the meantime, he continued his routine, managing orders, checking finances, coordinating with his small business partners, and keeping a careful record of every transaction. Every detail mattered, and Alex had learned over the months that discipline and attention to detail could make the difference between success and failure. It was on a warm Saturday morning that the opportunity to reveal his progress arrived. His friends had planned a small get-together at a local cafe. They laughed, joked, and talked about everyday things: work, family, and the latest news in town. As usual, Alex's friends teased him gently, joking about how he always seemed to have some big secret plan and whether he was still counting every penny he spent. He smiled politely, saying nothing. He had been waiting for the right moment, and today felt like it might be the perfect time. The cafe was lively, filled with the scent of coffee and fresh pastries. People chatted in small groups, laughter echoing off the walls. Alex joined the table where his friends were seated, their teasing already underway. "So, are we going to hear about your latest big idea today?" one friend asked, smirking. Another chimed in, "Or are you just going to tell us how careful you are with your money again?" Everyone laughed, expecting the usual self-deprecating reply from Alex. But this time, Alex didn't respond with words. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and opened his banking app. He scrolled for a moment, making sure everything was in order, and then looked up at his friends with a calm, confident smile. "I think it's time you see something," he said quietly. The laughter faded slightly as curiosity replaced amusement. His friends leaned in, not sure what to expect. Alex held the phone steadily and showed the screen to his friends. The account balance displayed was far beyond what anyone could have imagined. It was the result of months of careful savings, disciplined investment, and strategic planning. For a moment, there was complete silence. The cafe noise seemed to fade into the background as his friends stared at the numbers, processing what they were seeing. Then, almost simultaneously, disbelief turned into astonishment. "Wait, is this real?" One friend whispered, eyes wide. Another simply shook their head, muttering, "I can't believe it." The laughter that had filled the table moments ago was replaced by stunned silence. Everyone was trying to comprehend that the young man they had once teased for being cautious, frugal, and sometimes clumsy had actually managed to achieve something extraordinary. Alex didn't gloat. He simply smiled, letting the numbers speak for themselves. He explained briefly how he had achieved this balance: careful budgeting, consistent saving, smart investments, and a side project that had grown steadily over time. His words were calm and matter-of-fact, but the impact was undeniable. The people who had doubted him could now see clearly that his discipline and patience had paid off in ways they had never imagined. His friends, still processing the shock, began to ask questions. "How did you even start? Where did you get the idea?" One asked. Another asked, "Did you ever think we would see this day?" Alex answered each question honestly, sharing some insights without giving every detail away. He wanted them to understand that this was not luck or a sudden windfall. It was the result of persistent effort, careful planning, and quiet determination. The cafe, once filled with light teasing and laughter, now felt like a stage for a quiet lesson. People nearby noticed the reaction at the table, some leaning over curiously to see what was happening. Alex's friends, usually so confident in their judgments, were suddenly humbled. They realized that they had underestimated someone they thought they knew well. The young man who had been the target of jokes, who had been laughed at for his frugality and careful habits, had quietly built a future they could hardly comprehend. Alex took a moment to reflect on how far he had come. He remembered the early days working long hours at the grocery store, being teased by coworkers, and quietly plotting his path to financial independence. He remembered the nights spent researching investments, the weekends devoted to side projects, and the moments of doubt he had overcome. Each step, no matter how small, had led him to this point. And now, all of that effort was visible, undeniable, and powerful. The reactions of his friends were varied. Some were genuinely impressed, eyes shining with admiration. Others were still processing, a mix of envy and respect on their faces. But one thing was clear: the laughter that had once been aimed at Alex had lost all power. He had shown, without arrogance or drama, that quiet effort and patience would create results that were far more significant than most people expected. As the morning turned into afternoon, Alex's friends continued to ask questions, now genuinely curious and eager to understand. He shared insights about the importance of consistency, careful decision-making, and long-term planning. He emphasized that there were no shortcuts, no secret tricks, just steady, disciplined work, and the willingness to learn from mistakes. His friends listened intently, some taking notes mentally, others simply absorbing the lesson that life sometimes rewards patience more than speed. Throughout it all, Alex remained humble. He did not boast about his achievements or look down on those who had laughed at him in the past. He understood that respect earned through effort and results was far more valuable than admiration gained through pride or arrogance. His calm demeanor and quiet confidence made the lesson even more impactful. He had succeeded not by showing off, but by working steadily and carefully, letting his actions speak louder than words. By the end of the day, the story of Alex's account balance had begun to spread. His friends shared the experience with others, recounting how the young man they had underestimated had quietly built a financial foundation that was impressive and inspiring. People in the town began to take notice, some seeking advice, others simply marveling at the transformation. Alex, however, did not let the attention distract him. He remained focused on the work ahead, understanding that this was just one milestone in a much longer journey. The reveal also brought a shift in Alex's perspective. He realized that patience and persistence were not just tools for financial success, they were lessons for life. The laughter he had endured, the doubts he had overcome, and the quiet discipline he had maintained had all contributed to his growth as a person. He had learned resilience, focus, and the value of trusting oneself. Lessons that would guide him long after the numbers on a screen faded, even as recognition and curiosity surrounded him. Alex continued his routine. He checked orders, managed his investments, and planned his next steps. He had learned that success was not a single event, but a continuous process. The reveal of his account balance was exciting, yes. But it was also a reminder of the responsibility that came with achievement. He had built something meaningful, and now it was up to him to maintain it, grow it, and use it wisely. The laughter that had once defined him no longer held power. Instead, it became a distant memory, a reminder of how far he had come. Alex's journey demonstrated that the opinions of others could be temporary, but the results of one's efforts were lasting. He had moved from being the target of jokes to being a quiet example of what discipline, patience, and determination could achieve. That evening, as Alex walked home from the cafe, he felt a sense of calm fulfillment. The city lights glowed softly, reflecting in the puddles left by a light rain earlier in the day. He carried no sense of prideful arrogance, only a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his work had made a real difference. He had taken the laughter, doubt, and skepticism he had faced for so long and turned them into motivation, creating results that spoke louder than any words ever could. At home, he sat down at his small table, reflecting on the journey. He opened his notebook and began to jot down ideas for the future. The reveal of his progress was not the end, it was the beginning of a new chapter. He now had the resources, confidence, and knowledge to pursue even bigger goals. But he knew that the key to continued success would be the same principles that had brought him this far: patience, discipline, careful planning, and quiet persistence. Alex also thought about his friends, realizing that they had learned an important lesson too. The laughter they had once directed at him had been replaced with curiosity, respect, and perhaps a hint of envy. But most importantly, they had seen firsthand that success could come from quiet effort, careful planning, and the determination to keep moving forward. Even when no one was watching, the next few days were filled with reflection and planning. Alex reviewed the systems he had put in place, analyzed the performance of his side projects, and considered new opportunities for growth. He understood that the reveal of his account balance was not just about showing success, it was about reinforcing the habits, discipline, and mindset that had created it. He wanted to continue building, learning, and improving, knowing that this was only the beginning of a much larger journey. By the time the week ended, Alex had begun to implement new strategies for growth. He expanded his side projects, explored additional investment options, and refined his approach to time management. Each step was deliberate, measured, and thoughtful. The lessons of the past months, the importance of patience, discipline, and quiet effort remained at the center of his approach. The reveal had changed the way others saw him, but it had not changed the way he saw himself. Alex remained grounded, humble, and focused on the work ahead. He had learned that true success was not about impressing others or gaining attention. It was about building a life of purpose, discipline, and meaningful achievement. And now, with the visible proof of his efforts, he felt more motivated than ever to continue his journey, step by step, day by day. After the reveal at the cafe, Alex's life began to change in subtle but meaningful ways. His friends and coworkers who had once laughed at him now looked at him differently. Some were curious, some impressed, and others quietly reflective. But Alex remained the same humble, focused person he had always been. He had achieved a level of financial stability and recognition, yet he refused to let it change his character. He knew that the real work was not in showing results, but in maintaining and building upon them. In the days that followed, Alex's routine continued with the same dedication it always had. Mornings were spent managing his side projects, checking orders, and ensuring that every detail was correct. Afternoons were for the grocery store, where he worked with the same care and patience as before. Evenings were devoted to planning, research, and reflection. Though some aspects of his life had changed, he had more resources, more options, and more confidence. The structure, discipline that had brought him this far remained his foundation. One of the most noticeable changes was the way people began to seek him out for advice. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers in the community started asking questions about how he had managed to save, invest, and build a small business alongside a regular job. Alex was careful in his responses. He didn't want to give the impression of showing off or handing out easy answers. Instead, he shared the principles that had guided him: patience, careful planning, consistent effort, and learning from mistakes. He emphasized that there were no shortcuts and that results came from persistence and thoughtful action over time. At work, his coworkers' attitudes began to shift. The teasing that had once been constant faded into occasional playful jokes, and in its place emerged respect and subtle admiration. People noticed his calm confidence and the quiet competence with which he handled responsibilities. Even those who had doubted him began to realize that Alex had achieved something remarkable, not through luck or charm, but through steady, disciplined effort. Despite the growing attention, Alex remained grounded. He knew that success was fragile, if not nurtured properly, and he refused to become complacent. Each day he reminded himself that discipline, humility, and focus were what had brought him here. He continued to invest wisely, manage his projects carefully, and prioritize learning and growth. The lessons he had learned during the years of preparation had become second nature. Resilience, patience, and attention to detail were not just tools for financial success. They were tools for life. Alex also became more aware of the impact his journey could have on others. He thought about the people in his community who struggled with financial challenges, those who worked hard but felt stuck, and those who doubted their potential. He realized that his story could inspire others, showing that small, consistent efforts could lead to meaningful results. But he also knew that inspiration was not about flashy displays or sudden wealth. It was about demonstrating the power of steady effort, thoughtful choices, and quiet perseverance. One evening, Alex decided to host a small gathering at his apartment. It was modest, just a few friends and neighbors. But he wanted to share his experience and offer practical advice in a personal, human way. He spoke about his journey, emphasizing the importance of setting clear goals, tracking progress, and maintaining patience even when results seemed distant. He shared practical tips for budgeting, saving, and making small investments, always focusing on the process rather than the outcome. People listened intently, taking notes mentally and appreciating the honesty and humility in his words. His friends, who had once doubted him, now asked thoughtful questions about their own lives and ambitions. They were no longer laughing at him. They were learning from him. Alex felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing that his journey was not just about personal success, but about sharing lessons that could help others improve their lives. He understood that influence and respect were earned through consistent action and authentic behavior, not through showy gestures or boastful words. As the months continued, Alex's side projects grew steadily. Orders increased, and his investments continued to yield returns. He began exploring additional opportunities, carefully assessing risks and potential benefits. Each decision was made with discipline and foresight, reflecting the habits he had cultivated over years of careful planning. He remained humble, recognizing that success could be temporary if not nurtured properly, and that mistakes could happen to anyone. Alex also invested time in personal growth beyond finances. He read books about human behavior, communication, and leadership. He practiced listening more attentively, understanding people's perspectives, and offering help when possible. These skills were not only useful in his ventures but also strengthened his relationships with family, friends, and the broader community. He realized that true success was holistic, encompassing personal growth, meaningful work, and positive impact on others. Over time, Alex's story began to reach a wider audience. People in town, and eventually from nearby areas, learned about the young man who had quietly worked, saved, and invested his way to success. Some were inspired to start their own small projects, while others were motivated to approach their finances more carefully. Alex didn't seek recognition, but he welcomed the opportunity to share what he had learned. He encouraged others to take small steps, emphasizing that meaningful change was possible, even without grand gestures or sudden windfalls. Despite the growing attention, Alex remained deeply connected to his roots. He continued to work at the grocery store, not out of necessity, but out of habit and respect for the routine that had shaped him. He valued the interactions with customers, the simple satisfaction of a job done well, and the sense of discipline it reinforced. The store had been a part of his journey. He wanted to honor the lessons it had taught him: patience, humility, and attention to detail. Alex also reflected on the role of laughter and doubt in his journey. The teasing he had endured had once been a source of frustration, but he now recognized it as a catalyst for growth. Each joke, each dismissive comment, had pushed him to work harder, to plan more carefully, to prove to himself that he was capable. What had once felt like a burden had become motivation, teaching him resilience and the importance of believing in oneself, even when others do not. In his personal life, Alex focused on meaningful relationships. He spent time with family and friends, offering support, encouragement, and practical advice when appropriate. He recognized that success was not just about financial achievement, but also about nurturing connections, contributing to the well-being of others, and building a life of purpose. His humility, combined with his accomplishments, made him approachable and respected within his community. One day, Alex received a letter from a young person in town, asking for guidance on how to start a small business and manage personal finances. The letter reminded him of the questions he had once had and the doubts he had faced. He responded thoughtfully, sharing practical steps, encouragement, and the lessons he had learned along the way. The act of mentoring someone else brought him a deep sense of fulfillment, reinforcing the idea that success was most meaningful when it could be shared and used to uplift others. As time went on, Alex continued to build on his achievements. He expanded his projects carefully, invested wisely, and maintained his disciplined approach to life. Each day, he revisited his goals, assessed his progress, and made thoughtful adjustments. He remained humble, focused, and patient, understanding that sustainable success required ongoing effort and vigilance. Looking back, Alex realized that the journey had been about much more than money or recognition. It had been about personal growth, resilience, and the quiet strength of persistence. The laughter he had once endured had been transformed into respect, and the doubt he had faced had become motivation. He had learned that success was rarely instant, that meaningful change required careful planning, consistent effort, and the courage to persevere even when others doubted you. In the end, Alex's story became a quiet legend in his community. People admired him not only for his financial achievements, but also for his humility, discipline, and integrity. He had shown that it was possible to turn small steps into meaningful progress, that patience and careful effort could overcome skepticism and doubt, and that real success was built on a foundation of thoughtful, consistent action. Alex remained grounded, aware that the journey was ongoing. There were always new challenges, new opportunities, and new lessons to learn. But he faced the future with confidence, knowing that the principles that had guided him, patience, discipline, perseverance, and humility, would continue to serve him well. He learned that life was not a race, but a journey, and that meaningful success came to those who worked quietly, consistently, and with integrity. As the sun set over the town, Alex sat at his small wooden table, reflecting on the path he had traveled. He thought about the laughter, the doubts, and the small victories that had brought him here. He realized that every step, every decision, and every moment of patience had contributed to a life that was now stable, meaningful, and full of promise. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had been worth every effort. And so, Alex continued forward, not seeking applause or recognition, but driven by the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he had built something lasting and meaningful. He had learned that true success was not about impressing others, but about trusting oneself, working consistently, and remaining humble in the face of achievement. The laughter that once defined him had been replaced by respect. The doubts that once clouded his path had been transformed into a life of purpose, stability, and inspiration.